Welcome back to another edition of the Beers and Pigskins podcast. This is your host, Jacob Wall, and I got here Mason Davis. And we are week 10 into the college football season. We had a great weekend last week. Unfortunately, I had to watch Baylor, and so, that part wasn't great. However, across the country wise, we had some great games. We had some teams that absolutely went out there and killed it, had some really close games. But yeah, just a great weekend of college football overall. I think one of the better ones that we've had as up until this point. Yeah, Mason, how's your weekend?
It was good, yeah. I would say, and we kind of going into last week, it wasn't a weekend per se that we were particularly super, amped up about. It was a rather what we thought was going to be a calm kind of slate, probably easy games for a lot of teams. There's really only one big matchup in the Oregon-Utah game, but it turned out there were tons of upsets across the board and tons of games that ended up being pretty close that probably shouldn't have been. So super fun weekend. I think in the final year of the 4-team format for the playoff, chaos is always super fun to see. And, we saw another unbeaten team go down. So it's really getting interesting as the weeks go on.
I also, and I mean, we'll talk about this. I can't say that I was too upset to see that unbeaten team go down. Didn't really bring a tear to any of my eyes, but yeah. So I think to start out, before we kind of just get into next the next slate of games and kind of talk about this weekend, because it's looking like we have a pretty good weekend coming up. I think we just want to go through real quick, and I think the way we want to go about this is just hitting some highlights, of the weekend, and then hitting some lowlights, on some teams and maybe some coaches, that kind of had a down week. And so we'll start with the positives. We'll start with the highlights, and I think the most obvious one here is Kansas and Lance Leipold. That program has finally turned around. He has finally built up that program after, I think this is his third year. And you know what we're talking about. They didn't go into Norman. The Sooners came to them, and they took down number 6 Oklahoma and Brent Venables. And they looked great. They battled back after they kind of lost the early lead, and they just killed it. It's one of those teams where I'm not a huge fan of Kansas basketball, but Kansas football, you kind of got to root for them. They're just a feel-good team. They're kind of building up from, kind of being at the very bottom of the bottom. I mean, they just look fantastic, and they looked great, and then made Oklahoma also look bad.
Yeah, no, it's cool. This program was, like you said, the bottom of the bottom. I mean, they were having 1-11 seasons. Brought in Les Miles. That turned into a madness of a time. He ended up being fired, and
it turned sideways pretty quickly.
Yeah, it didn't take too long with some stuff coming out, but it's been turned around. I've really enjoyed this team all year long. I really liked the running back Devin Neal. I've kind of been watching him all season long, and I had a feeling this game was going to be competitive, especially being a home game in Lawrence. That's one thing. The Jayhawk fan base can be pretty rowdy. I think a lot of probably the basketball people, because I have many friends that went to Kansas and, Rock Chalk Jayhawk, and being in that stadium and that atmosphere is, with Bill Self as a coach, it's one thing, but I'm thinking some of that started to finally bleed over into what's seeing as a successful football season. And so, man, they were game planned for it, and it's not like they had a amazing day passing the ball or anything like that, but they were very efficient running the ball. They, I think, stuck to their game plan probably for the most part, and they played really good defense. OU tried to kind of come back there at the end, but they staved them off, and I would say that would be we talked about it probably multiple times, but OU is bound to lose. It's just how this program works. It's how the Big 12 works. The undefeated ends up dropping a game typically at some point along the way against a team you wouldn't necessarily expect them to. And this happened to be Kansas, and Dylan Gabriel's Heisman hopes are probably out the window now at that point. And they're really now way on the outside looking in on a potential playoff bid. Like everything has to go their way. There's no room for error at this point.
Yeah, and then with that, it makes the Big 12 a lot more interesting. There's 4 or 5 teams at the top now that are 4-1 in the conference, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. But as a low light that we have written down here, just because we were talking about them, Oklahoma. I mean, I won't go like too into it. I won't dog on them too much. But I mean, we all saw the picture. When you make a shirt and you have Brent Venables wearing it that says the only thing, I think it was like the only thing that Oklahoma fears is God. We don't fear anybody else.
Yeah.
And then you follow it up with barely beating UCF and then losing to Kansas, who, again, nothing against Kansas. They're just not a perennial powerhouse program. I mean, that's kind of a tough look. They were looking a little bit more like the Oklahoma of last year rather than the Oklahoma that we saw for the first 6 games of the year. I have no doubts that they'll kind of get it figured out again, and they need to against Oklahoma State this upcoming weekend. We have Bedlam this weekend. They kind of need to get it turned around because we'll kind of go into that. I also have them written down. Oklahoma State, I don't know if you've been keeping up with them too much, but I think in week 2, they lost to South Alabama by 26 points. And since then, they have turned it around and are now again find themselves at the top of the Big 12. They're playing some really good football. And I'm not going to say it's all because of one guy, but Ollie Gordon, their running back, if you're not familiar with him, in the last 4 games has accounted for practically 1,000 yards just in total. Most of them are on the ground, but also catches the ball out of the backfield. Has gotten 9 touchdowns, and it just looks like Mike Gundy and the Oklahoma State Cowboys have just completely 180'd how their season was going. I personally thought after losing to South Alabama by 26, I thought they might go like 2-10, 3-9. Like, I mean, that's the trajectory they were on, and completely turned it around. And now going into this week against Oklahoma, it has huge Big 12, championship games, playoff, not college football playoff, but, winning the Big 12 implications, when just a couple weeks ago, that wasn't even a blip on the radar. And so I just want to take 2 minutes to shout them out because, oh my goodness, have they made a U-turn. And Ollie Gordon right now is playing like by far the best running back in college football, is absolutely putting that team on his back.
Yeah, no, it's going to make for a real interesting, I assume Oklahoma State's going to be watching a lot of tape and see what was successful for Kansas on the ground. They had a really good day for over 200 yards, and Ollie's been doing that himself. So it's going to be curious to see what adjustments Venables makes. Obviously, there was some issues, and that's one thing he is known for, is making adjustments. So see how that Sooner defense kind of shores up. And they're going on the road again and playing, up in I have too many friends that go there to not know where it is. Stillwater. I knew it was like a double word. Up in Stillwater. It's going to be a hostile environment. And yeah, no, the Okies have turned it around, and it's going to be a good one. It's a good rivalry game, and definitely one to tune in. It's an early afternoon game. So,
I was going to say, is that a night game? Because I haven't been there personally, but night games in Stillwater are really cool.
Yeah.
They got the whole. Is it just the hands, or do they have those things? I know they slap on the kind of the things that kind of line the stadium. You know what I'm talking about? The
Yeah.
mats. Do they have like paddles that they do that with? I can't remember if that's them or if that's a different school. But anyways, I know it gets super loud. They have quite the environment in Stillwater, especially for Bedlam. So if you're going to be there, that's going to be fantastic. It always is. And it's definitely a game that I always enjoy watching every single year. And then kind of getting into kind of our last set of one highlight and one low light. Two teams that played each other a couple weeks ago. We have Oregon, who game plan perfectly, executed perfectly, and really just stopped a Utah team that was really rolling. They just stopped them in their tracks. Yes, they don't have Cam Rising, and obviously their quarterback situation isn't ideal, but they just come off of, taking down a USC team, which 50-49 to Cal. That's tough. Especially when it should have been 50-50 going to overtime. Cal just decided to go for 2 and for the win. That's a
When USC had to come back in that game, like that was.
They also had to come back. Yeah, I know. That's wow. Won't really get into that, but I mean, Washington the last couple weeks. I mean, if you've listened to most of our episodes and kind of followed along with us, Washington's kind of been my team coming out of the Pac-12. It's not looking so great. I mean, they didn't lose, but they kind of should have lost to Stanford. Fourth down, I mean, they just had that drop pass. Stanford was in a great position to go down there and win the game. They just, unfortunately had a small drop pass there. But Washington, really, really struggling to, pull out games against, Arizona State and Stanford, who are just not top programs this year, not teams that they should be struggling with. And it's ever since that game, Oregon and Washington have just been on two completely different trajectories. And it's very interesting to see, and I don't have a great explanation as to why that is. Washington's defense seems to have gotten worse. And also their offense just seemed to not be clicking on the level that they were in the first 6 games. They really need to figure some things out before they play USC this weekend. I think that's a very dangerous trap game for them, because at this point, I don't think USC has a ton to play for. They've lost 2 games. They barely pull it out against Cal. And so as far as college football playoff hopes, they don't really have any, but that doesn't take anything away from they still have one of the better offenses in the country and can score a ton of points. And so Washington's going to need to be ready, because this can go south very, very quickly for them. So, we're going to need to see the Michael Penix Heisman candidate that we were seeing. We're going to need to see more of that, and their defense is going to really have to tighten some things up as well, because it's it's not looking too hot right now. They're still unblemished. They're still fine. They just needs to be turned around. An Oklahoma State, kind of redirection, if you will.
Yeah, no, I would say, and even though they lost the game, I think Oregon has been the better team since the Washington game. And I even think they arguably played better in that game. They just had 3, 4 fourth down calls that didn't go their way. And obviously the missed field goal at the end. They win that game, we could have Oregon right there in the number 4 spot. I really like Oregon. They're just super efficient across the board. Bo Nix is playing really well. They're trending in the right direction, and if Washington drops a game against USC, obviously Oregon still has USC later on as well, and Oregon State. But I don't know. Pac-12, kind of like the Big 12. I don't know if we're going to see an undefeated team come to the championship time. And it could make for it's making for chaos. And it's exactly what I want to see. Because more chaos just means, more likelihood of something crazier happening, which I'll talk about later. But yeah, Washington, man, their defense, which is something we kind of we talked about, even going back to the Oregon game, was going into that was like Oregon has the better defense. Washington, that's where they need to step up. And I don't know. It's like they kind of almost just had a hangover after that game, and they've just got beat up quite a bit, and they just have seemed very out of their mojo that they were in those first 6 weeks of the season. And so this is a trap game for them, 100%. Or not yet, but 2 weeks time when they play USC. But even
are they on a bye this week?
Yes.
I thought their next game.
No. They play Cal this week, and then they play USC the following.
Oh, I don't know where.
No, I lied to you. I'm looking at Oregon's schedule. Because that's what I do. I don't pay attention. Where did it go? No, they play this week.
Okay. All right.
Which, funny enough, ESPN has USC as a 54% chance of winning in the matchup predictor. It's in the Coliseum. So I don't know. Like you said, USC's got nothing to play for. Caleb Williams is probably looking to close his college career out with at least a big win on his resume there. He seems to have dropped all of the big games. Bowl game last year, Notre Dame this year, obviously the other game this year. So this would be his moment. And also it would be Mr. Lincoln Riley's moment. But nonetheless, it's going to be a fun one. That is a night game. I guess it's not technically a night game. 6:30 for us. It's 4:30 over there at that time. So who knows how packed it'll be. LA can be sometimes just hit or miss. So nonetheless, it'll be a very big game as far as, playoff implications, Pac-12 implications go, especially after rankings come out later this evening. We're recording this on a Tuesday, the 31st. Halloween. Happy Halloween, everyone. Tell us in the comments. Tell us what you or your children are going dressed up as. Hopefully, never mind. Not going to say that. But tell us, enjoy, get all the candy. I know I have been put in charge of passing out candy this evening. So
very nice. I don't foresee, just kind of in my apartment complex. I don't think I'm going to get very many trick-or-treaters.
Not as common.
But, that's okay.
You can live vicariously.
Coming up here soon. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you all about it.
Yeah. Anyways, moving on.
Moving on
to the games that we have coming up this week, and we do have quite a few that we want to get through. We do have a tendency to kind of ramble on about just any game in general. We'll just go off on tangents. And I think that'll be the one at the end. We'll give Mason a good solid, 10 to 15 minutes to talk about his LSU Tigers, because they do have the game of the week, I would say, against Alabama. But going into some, maybe not quite as big, but still big games, we have a couple games in the Big 12 that have, like we were talking about earlier, as far as the Big 12 championship game, these are pretty big and kind of deciding how that's going to shape out. We have Texas versus Kansas State, and we also have the Bedlam game. Starting off with Texas and Kansas State, I'm going to pose this question to you. Mm-hmm. Have you been watching what Kansas State's been doing?
I think I've watched like 2 games of Kansas State, and that was the UCF game and the TCU game, I believe, which they blew out TCU, and they blew out Houston last week.
Yeah, well, they are 6-2. They've dropped a game to a very close game to Missouri, who is now, I believe, 14 in the country. As well, they dropped a game to Oklahoma State, in the middle of their miraculous turnaround, like we talked about. But in the last 2 weeks, they've outscored their opponents 81-3. They are looking unstoppable right now. I mean, they even, they had a convincing win against Texas Tech the week prior to that, 3 weeks ago. And they've looked absolutely incredible. It looks like that offense is absolutely moving. The defense that, was going up against a Houston team that looked good against Texas the week before, they completely shut them out. And so, with that being said, with Quinn Ewers being out for Texas, I know that Malik Murphy had a pretty decent game to start with, to kind of get his college career started. I'm taking Kansas State. I believe they have enough to kind of pull it out against Texas. I do believe it's going to be in Austin. So Texas will have that going for them. However, Kansas State is the real deal. I don't see them slowing down all that much at this point. They're just a big huge train that's just kind of rolling and rolling, and it's going to take a whole lot to stop them. And I don't think that Texas has that, especially with how they've played the last couple weeks and what's been going on.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree here. Do you know where Kansas State? I know it's in Austin, but do you know where Kansas State is located?
Yeah, it's in Manhattan.
In Manhattan, Kansas. Have you ever been to Manhattan, Kansas?
I have not. I know that it is called the Little Apple, but that is essentially all I know.
So I've been to Manhattan, Kansas many times.
Okay.
In Manhattan, Kansas, there's obviously the school. There is an army base there,
Okay.
and a very small like shopping center. Pretty much, there's a Walmart, and then some restaurants. That's about it. And there's a little tiny airstrip. These guys got nothing out there, and it's cold. I don't know if you've been in Kansas in the wintertime when it's so flat. I mean, it's
Nothing stopping the win.
It's bad. It's
Yep.
bad. And that's why I think this team always plays so well. It's because they always play with such a grit to them. They always fight. They're never like, you had the way back in the Colin Klein years was kind of their peak, but they're never really ever the bottom of the Big 12. And they
No.
usually can play pretty competitive in a lot of games where they probably are outmatched. And right now they're on a hot streak, like you said, outscoring their opponents 82-3 or whatever it is. I really like this team. I like the way they always play. I've been there, been into their football stadium before, been into the soccer stadium. I bleed purple for this team, and I'm going Wildcats all the way. Upset in Austin. Again, I don't know what the quarterback situation is, but regardless, Ewers starts, Ewers doesn't start. It's Murphy's team. I don't know who it is. Purple People Eaters 2.0 taking down the Longhorns.
Man, I had no idea from start to finish where that was going.
Even
at the very end.
I found my words as they came out of my mouth.
Eaters 2.0. Okay.
They're from up north too. I mean, close enough. It's cold. They know how to deal with it, right?
Okay. Well, you know what? You stuck the landing there. Proud of you. It finally came full circle. It looks like we're in agreement there. Real quick, the Bedlam game. We've already talked about it a little bit. With how much I talked about Oklahoma State at the beginning, I cannot, in good faith, get back here and when we're talking about the game and kind of go against him. Mike Gundy is a grown man, and he and Ollie Gordon are going to hand Oklahoma their second loss of the season, the last Bedlam game for a while before Oklahoma runs off to the SEC.
Oh,
I like Oklahoma State.
What a narrative that would be. I'm going to piggyback on that. That's too good to pass up. I think with how successful Gundy's got this offense churning right now. Gordon's a powerhouse on the ground. They're going to continue to just play their game, and if they're doing it at home, it's going to be loud. It's going to be proud. Hey, we're ready to send you back into the SEC. So I like that a lot. Yeah, I'm gonna double down with you there and taking the Okies at home.
Yeah, and shout out really quick, their quarterback Alan Bowman has made a couple different stops in college football. Started out at Texas Tech, and then went all the way up to play for my boys up in Michigan. Was a backup quarterback there for a while, and has finally kind of found his home in Oklahoma State, and has been playing pretty good football. So, what's up?
That's Alan Bowman. It sounds like he's going to be working at Goldman Sachs on Wall Street in a couple years.
Oh, goodness.
Just a very...
You heard it here first. Mason Davis does not believe in Alan Bowman's future NFL career.
I don't know about that.
All right, moving on. One game before we get into a couple SEC matchups, I'm just gonna say my piece real quick. Maryland and Penn State. Here's what I'm thinking. Penn State, like we talked about before we got on here, I don't know how much of that game you watched, but Penn State was tied with Indiana 24-24, I believe it was, with like 2 to 3 minutes left in the game. Nothing against Indiana and Tom Allen, but just not a great team. They don't really have it this year. And so it's pretty concerning when, I know they had a tough week against Ohio State, but, you're still a top 10 team, and, they were really struggling against Indiana. That offense was struggling to get going. That defense also gave up some really big touchdowns, quick plays. Maryland started out 5-0, has since gone 0-3. They lost to Ohio State, then tough loss to Illinois, and then lost to a Northwestern program that, again, is not, one of the better Northwestern teams that we have been able to see in the last few years, 7-8 years.
Yeah.
I think this game is very dangerous for Penn State. They need to be ready because Maryland still has the firepower that we saw in those first 5 games. It didn't go away. Are they executing as they were? No, they're not. However, I think they may come out and just play with nothing else to lose. Backs against the wall, they're going to come out firing. And I think Penn State needs to be absolutely ready for Maryland because it has the potential. Maryland can get in a shootout with you. They can score some points. And I think that Penn State needs to be very ready. They cannot keep letting up those huge touchdowns that they were giving up against Indiana because Maryland is also capable of that. I'm not saying it's going to happen because I still think that Penn State is a good team. I still think they're a very good team. They need to be ready for it. That's all I'm going to say. It's just a watch out for that game because it could get messy pretty quickly.
Just putting them on notice.
Just on notice. I mean, not even a, hey, this is going to happen. Upset alert for sure. No, just a little notice. That's all. Yeah,
that's fair.
I was watching some of that game against Indiana, and it did not look pretty.
I wasn't watching, but I was watching the score because I was fingers crossed for the upset because chaos. But I did see the last couple things that happened that just we went from a tie ball game to 9 points in like 10 seconds, which
Yeah,
was lovely.
the wheels fell off, and it
They
is what it is.
They did, but that's okay.
But
Good for trying.
But before we get into the game of the week, Georgia
Ba-da-ba-da-bum.
is taking on Missouri in what is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is their best matchup. Well, I say best, toughest matchup that they've had so far. I think by far. Missouri is number 14 in the country now. They can throw the ball around for sure. And it's going to be Georgia's toughest test. So what are we thinking about that?
Yeah, I actually texted a few of my buddies last week. Didn't know what to expect going into the Florida game that Georgia had in the swamp without Brock Bowers. How is this team going to rebound, after that? Well, I believe the text I sent out was, does Florida stand a chance? And I got a resounding no, not at all. And I didn't know how to absorb that information. It's like, well, I don't know. I don't know what to think. Who knows? Maybe Graham Mertz put something together crazy and this team just does something. And boy, was I wrong. Georgia came out and looked like, the Georgia that can be the number one team in the country.
They were down 7-0. Sorry, not to interrupt you there.
No, you're fine. McConkey came out and put on a clinic. Had a great day, great showing, filled in that role. And Dejon Edwards, great day on the ground. They got the run game going, and just made Florida seem nowhere near as competent as I hoped they would be. And that's tough to say that because I can't stand Florida. But yeah, I'm still, again, not sold on it. Maybe Florida's just that bad. They haven't shown up in really any of these big games. They've kind of dropped the ball a lot of the time. So this is going to be the first real test offensively, or like at least for the defense in terms of what kind of offense they're facing. Mizzou has kind of slowed down a little bit since their hot start to the year. They were for a while like a top 10 offense going into. I think they were a top 10 offense going into the LSU game. And since they've played Kentucky and South Carolina, which they both won, bounce back victories, which is really good, especially on the road at Kentucky. But they just haven't put up quite the same numbers. And I don't know if Burden, I think he's fine. I think he's fully healthy. He played in both games. He had a quiet game in the Kentucky game. I don't know if he played that full game or not. But he's going to be obviously the playmaker here for Mizzou to really be successful. Him and Cody Schrader on the ground are going to be the tools for success. If they force Mizzou to throw the ball and shut down the run game, they're really, I don't want to say they're limited because they exposed a lot of issues on LSU's defense, which we already knew about, and they had other playmakers show up. But I think a team to the Georgia quality, if they can shut down Burden and force somebody else to be the guy here, it could be a long day for Mizzou. Mizzou's defense obviously isn't the best. They did a lot better against Spencer Rattler in South Carolina. But this team's kind of rolling after last week, Georgia and Carson Beck. Let me look at the spread real quick.
15.5.
15.5. Oof. And it's at home. It's in Athens. I think Georgia wins this game. It might be more of like a 7 to 10 point victory. I wouldn't be surprised if it got up to 15 or 16, but I like Mizzou to stay competitive. If they can keep it competitive all four quarters, and not let Georgia have like a 21-point quarter where they don't put up any matching points, that's going to be a real key thing because Georgia can go off in hot spurts and get a couple touchdowns and get, some 3 and outs from you real quick. So if they don't let that happen and they can extend the game out, run the ball a little bit more, I hope Missouri can stay around. But I think the more important test for Georgia, like this is the start of a 3-game gauntlet for them. And this is going to kind of prove if they're battle tested going forward toward whoever they end up playing in the SEC championship. Because you got three really good offenses in Mizzou, Ole Miss, and Tennessee back to back to back. So I like Georgia in this one, but I'm really hoping Mizzou keeps it close.
I think it gets a little bit more out of hand than 15. I think as long as Georgia, the only thing they can't do, and I think as long as they don't do this, they'll be able to get it past 15, which is we've seen them a couple times just kind of come out and not look fully awake and just kind of whatever, just kind of they're out there. They're not playing bad, but also not playing maybe the way they should be playing.
Sure.
They went down early against Florida. It's not that it really impacted how they played the rest of the game. But they had the slow start against South Carolina and a slower start against Vandy. I think if they just, if they're out there and they start playing like Georgia that we've seen the last 2 years, like we've seen in some of the games this year, from the very first snap, I do believe it'll be more than 15 points. Missouri's got a good team. They've got a really, really solid offense this year. But again, I believe in Georgia. They haven't gotten a chance to absolutely show why they're the number one team in the country against a ranked opponent. But I think they're going to show it this week.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I think if Mizzou's going to have any chance, they basically have to score on every single possession they have. They can't basically be stopped or have turnovers. They're going to have to score touchdowns after touchdowns.
Definitely taking care of the ball. Yeah, no turnovers. You got to play a perfect game against Georgia.
Because Georgia's going to put up points against that defense, and you're going to have to do the exact same thing, and it's not, not quite the same, but it'll be a fun one nonetheless. Hopefully it's more competitive. But with that said, this takes us.
Can we add in music? Your LSU Tigers are taking on the Alabama Crimson Tide. Are they in Baton Rouge?
They're in Tuscaloosa.
They're in Tuscaloosa.
I would, before you give your little take, one thing I want to preface. I would say that this game, this rivalry, and especially in the last, let's just say since Nick Saban left LSU and went to Alabama, has been the biggest rivalry as standing alongside the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry in college football in the last 15 years.
In what aspect? As in
terms of quality of talent and build up for there's been a lot of, for instance, the 2011 season, many dubbed that the game of the century, as there were 22 out of 24 draft picks on that starting 11 on both sides or something like that, or there's like 46 players from those two teams total drafted or something like that.
Okay.
But I think there's a reason this matchup for both teams is always preceded by a bye week. It's one of the hardest hitting, most intense games. There were many years where Alabama clearly had the upper hand because they evolved. But in recent years, it's been more competitive. But nonetheless, for these two teams, it's typically a huge red circle on their calendar, as this kind of always has very big implications going forward for the rest of the season and what to expect in terms of, when it comes to the SEC West, usually Alabama, LSU are kind of right up there for who's going to win it. And then you have the random off years of somebody else. But nonetheless, huge matchup. Give me your thoughts, and then I'll dive.
Yeah. Okay. What I will say is my prediction in a perfect world. I'm obviously it, nothing is a perfect world. Nothing goes exactly how you think it's going to go. However, most simply put, if Alabama is able to get over whatever they've been doing this year for the last like 4 or 5 games since they kind of found it again, they lost it, lost to Texas, and then they seem to be in Armageddon there for a week or two and having a close matchup against USF. Um, if they can just put together an entire football game where they are firing on both sides of the ball, if we see second half versus Tennessee, Alabama for the full game, I think Alabama, in my mind, wins this game. Very simply put. However, I don't know if I believe in their ability to do so. I don't know what it is. It seems like the second half they played against Arkansas, they let them come right back into the game, and it came down to the wire against a team who a week later lost 7-3 against Mississippi State.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what to do exactly with predicting an Alabama team like this for a full game. I know what they can do. And so when I know what a team can do in terms of what is possible for them in being able to put two halves of football together, then in my mind against LSU's brand of football that they've played and what they have showed this year, I would think that Alabama would take this football game. I think the gap between Alabama's defense and LSU's defense is just greater than the gap between LSU's offense and Alabama's potential offense. And so I'm, in a sense, kind of maximizing what I think Alabama can do rather than maximizing what I think LSU will be able to do. Obviously, they have the great offense out there. I think I saw it was like offensive efficiency and putting teams into, there was like a best fit line, and then they had different sections of the graph, and then you have your very good offenses, your great offenses this year, and then they had a little section, and this will make you smile. It was unicorn offenses. And LSU's was the only one in the unicorn offense category. And so obviously they can put up points on anybody that they come across. It'll be interesting to see because Alabama's better unit is their defense. It'll be interesting to see what Alabama can do in terms of, like I talk about quite a bit, limiting and not stopping things. The goal when you come across these offenses is to limit and not to actually stop. You bend, but you don't break. I think it takes a extremely good effort from Jalen Milroe to be able to win this game without a doubt. He has to stay in the pocket. I know his first instinct is to take off and run. He's a very good runner, but I think he has to stay in the pocket and keep his wits about him. I think it turns into a shootout if and only if Alabama can play two halves of football. But if they don't, and this is where we turn it. If they don't, I can see LSU winning by like 7 down the road. Like down at the very end, like a touchdown to win the game. Jaden Daniels, if he's gonna have his Heisman moment, it's gonna come at a very, very end of the game versus Alabama. You've got 2 minutes and 54 seconds with a timeout to go down there and put points on the board to win the game. It just that's what it seems to be. I think Alabama has the potential to win this game, but in the realistic world, I see LSU's offense being overpowering and being the unit that wins this game.
So you're taking the Tigers. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think it's my bias a little bit against Alabama. Never been a huge Alabama fan, but we're just trying to be realistic here.
That's good. That's good that you're calling it realistic and not hoping or.
Which I hate it because, I want some differing views on the podcast, and that was just a bunch of rambling for like 3 minutes. And I know you're not going to sit here and take Alabama. So.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. No. Well, I'm glad you came to your senses. First off, you had me in the first half. You had me in the first half.
Don't say that. I still think Alabama's the better team.
Oh, so silly and naive, Jakob. So I'm going to end up eating my wind, I'm sure, because I'm going to jinx it just like I did preseason before they played Florida State and said they were going to go undefeated.
Yeah.
But I am feeling that kind of confidence right now in this team. I am feeling that kind of confidence in Jayden Daniels. This is the best offense in the country. The numbers don't lie. They are playing at an unreal rate, and the defense is coming along. Granted, yes, the last two opponents haven't been great. Army is garbage. Auburn, pretty much garbage for the most part, you could argue. Granted, they did beat Mississippi State, which was nice. And they had a close game with Ole Miss. But nonetheless, the defense is starting to click. They're starting to find a few pieces. The secondary is making a few plays. The turnovers are happening. The biggest key, obviously, is Alabama's defense is good. Dallas Turner's top 10 in the nation in sacks with 8. I think he's right around 10th or so. If they can find a way, if Jayden Daniels can make the right decisions, they're going to put up points. I'm not worried about that. But it's protecting him, first off. He's taken multiple shots, which we've talked about. I'm pretty sure there's a montage of him taking shots this year.
The man needs to protect himself. He puts himself in some of those situations.
So yeah, he needs to avoid those this game. This isn't the game to be taking those kind of risks. If you're scrambling for 12 yards and taking a blindside hit and fumbling the ball, every possession counts in this type of game to this magnitude, because this game does have such large implications, frankly, on the rest of the college football playoff and what's going to happen moving forward. I think Jayden Daniels does have his Heisman moment in this game and puts together a rousing game, just like Joe Burrow did when they marched into Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama for the first time in 8 years. Fortunately, we beat Alabama last year, so we're coming off, a win streak, thus one would say. But Jalen Milroe is not that guy. This offense is not that team. What do they have? Milroe has a broken play and they chunk it 80 yards to Prentice, Bond, or somebody else, or Burton. They don't have consistency on the offensive side of the ball. McClellan, I think, is a great talent, but frankly, I don't think they use him the right way. He'll have games where he goes off, and you have other games where it's like he did absolutely nothing. So they have zero consistency on that side of the ball. If they can keep everything in front of them, if Harold Perkins shows up on defense and just bullies Milroe all day, I'd be happy. It's going to be a night game. It's going to be physical. What's the line on it? Let me check real quick.
Alabama
minus 3. Oh, that's a disgrace. I'm taking the Tigers minus 10. It's going to be a day. Defense is going to show up for LSU in this game. The one time they need it all year, it's going to be this game. They're going to win by 2 touchdowns. Nick Saban's going to be like, what's going on? My team's falling apart. Alabama's going to be out. They're going to be done in the SEC West. That's going to ruin their chances of going to the conference championship. With that said, Alabama loses. Because that's the thing. I do think LSU's offense is that much better, difference-wise, between the defense and the two defenses, because I know this team's going to continue to put up points. So if it goes to a shootout, it goes to a shootout. They've been in one of those, and fortunately it didn't turn their way so far this year with Ole Miss. I don't think it's going to happen again. So whatever it is, turnover, some weird things go on in that stadium. Opening drive it was last year, or not last year, but in the Burrow Tua game, that crazy matchup. Tua fumbled the ball in the first drive. LSU got it, which just completely shifted, and then boom, we put up 36 points in the first half, which everyone was like, "Oh, what the heck's going on?" So I think something like that happens. I think the defense is going to be the difference maker here. I'm not worried about the offense. I think it's finally a game for them to show up. They're without starting D tackle Makai Wingo. He's out for this game, who is their number 18 guy, which for those that don't know, that's kind of like a signifying captain of the team. Every year they pick somebody to be number 18. So a lot of people are calling on who was supposed to have a huge year and hasn't been playing a whole lot or played great is Mason Smith, big old D tackle up front, who is a pretty high draft prospect for the last 2 years, but missed all of last season with a torn ACL because he celebrated after getting a sack in week 1. And hopefully he shows up and the D-line can get some pressure on Milroe. Again, I think a lot of that's going to be dictated on how they use Perkins, who has been playing. They finally, I think he's getting more and more comfortable every week with the way they're scheming him. And I do just want to pull up some of his stats real quick. Let me see if I can get them. And just say what he has done. We want defense, Mr. Perkins. And we want to go to, yes. So let's see. Okay. Well, he's had some big plays. He obviously had the interception against Mizzou, which kind of closed out that game. Big play. Some huge tackles against Auburn. Peyton Thorne's a rushing quarterback, able to close in on some tackles there. Army game, kind of brushed that off. That was a blowout. I didn't even watch that game, to be honest with you. But I think he's going to be the playmaker, the key to come to on this defense. And yeah, I like LSU to win. I am very confident in that. I'm not trying to be biased. I just do think the offense is that good from what I've watched and what I've watched of Alabama offense.
I do want to let you know that it is coming off as bias.
It is biased. It's 100% biased. Of course it is.
The only thing I want to point out.
Point it out.
The only thing I'm going to point out is that the best defense, I'm just looking at total defense.
Sure.
That LSU has played is Arkansas.
Sure.
They're 31st in the nation.
Sure.
Alabama is currently sitting at 17.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the NCAA's total defense statistic.
That's fair.
And the Arkansas Razorbacks did hold them to their lowest point total of the season at 34.
At 34.
Yeah, and all I'm saying is, the offense is going to have to show that, it's Alabama.
It is Alabama.
Alabama, at the end of the day, is still going to do Alabama things, and they're going to be Alabama.
Yeah, I just don't think they will be on offense. I think 34 points beats Alabama. I don't think Alabama puts up. If they do, I think we score more than that. Even 34 points against Arkansas again, who's frankly not a great program. They are decent on the defensive back end, but still 320 and 4 touchdowns. I'd be happy against Alabama if that could be replicated, or even I think for some reason Marvin Harrison Jr. and rightfully so is getting thrown into so many Heisman conversations as a receiver for what he's doing. And he's like barely even top 10 in a lot of statistics. Yes, some of the matchups have been better, but like Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas are no joke. Like Malik Neighbors is stupid good. He's leading the nation across the categories. Brian Thomas is 1 or 2 in touchdowns. I think he's tied for first in touchdowns in the nation. I think the run game also is very undervalued. I think Logan Diggs is a very good back. I'm going to keep coming at you.
It's because the entire Ohio State offense, at least right now, is predicated on Marvin Harrison making plays.
That's fair.
They did get Travion Henderson back, and he had a very good game against Wisconsin. I'm sure they're very happy to have him back. But it's because he's carrying a very unseasoned Kyle McCord through, and you know they're still undefeated. We'll see with the college football playoff rankings. We'll see where they're going to be ranked. But a top 5 team for sure. He is carrying that team along at least on the offensive side of the ball, and he is the reason they beat Penn State. I'm not. Obviously, the defense gave Penn State all the trouble in the world, but the reason they were able to get to 20 is because of Marvin Harrison. The reason that they beat Wisconsin and were able to pull away a little bit is because of Marvin Harrison. And it's just because he's that guy. And defenses right now don't have anybody else they can look at. They're looking at him. So that's why.
That's fair. And I'll give that. I want the recognition to be there across the board, because the 2 losses is slapping this offense in the face as far as how good they are in terms of everyone else. I feel like they're really being undervalued for how well of a season they're actually putting together on the offensive side of the ball in terms of.
It's because you let up 700 yards to Ole Miss.
Yeah, Ole Miss is
your biggest the LSU's offense. Their biggest enemy is their defense.
Their biggest enemy, Brian Kelly. That's their biggest enemy.
So
putting in the right
recognition, the defense needs to play better.
No, see, but that was the thing. Never mind. Not going to get on that tangent. But nonetheless, LSU takes the dub on the road again, just like they did a few years ago. And that's going to shake everything up. Georgia's going to win this week. Georgia's going to go undefeated, I think, probably for the regular season. But let's just say,
God help me in this podcast if LSU somehow wiggles their way into the SEC championship. Mason's going to take the LSU Tigers by 20 points over Georgia.
No, I wouldn't do that. I do think that would be a shootout, though. But again, and they had the same exact opportunity last year. Same thing happened. They went in to the Alabama game with 1 loss. Granted, we have 2 at this point. But we just had the loss against Florida State, and we beat Bama. Actually, we might have had 2 losses. Let me correct that real quick. But nonetheless, the narrative was being brought up. LSU beats Bama. Okay, now they have a chance to run the table with 2 losses and head into the SEC championship. What happens? What do you do if a 2-loss team beats an undefeated Georgia? We've never had a 2-loss team in the college football playoff, which I think is also part of why there's going to be the expansion with those at-large bids. But that same exact narrative is on the table right now. LSU's offense is capable of winning this game. If they do, and they make it to the SEC championship, if they win out, let's just assume Georgia wins out. That would take care of them winning the SEC West because Georgia plays Ole Miss. That would lock that up for them, even with the tiebreaker if Ole Miss didn't lose another game other than that. What happens if somehow they beat Georgia in the SEC championship? Now you have a 11-2 SEC champion, a 1-loss Georgia, and say a 1-loss Michigan or Ohio State. Let's just say, they both went out other than that game. Mm-hmm. And let's say Florida State goes undefeated. Do you take just, recency bias? Because at that point, I feel like, again, this is also dependent on what happens with Washington. Do they go undefeated? I don't know. I feel like it's just a recipe for a lot of crazy things to happen. And I want to see that happen. So
I know you do, because the crazier that it gets, the more likely the LSU. I want everybody to know that earlier or maybe last week, Mason did send me a screenshot of ESPN's playoff predictor that the only 2-loss team that they had on there was LSU, and they had like a 5% chance to beat or to make the whatever playoff thing.
It is now up to 7%. Thank you very
Based
much.
off of what, there hasn't been any games in between, has there?
Well,
Oh.
Oklahoma lost, which was a huge thing.
Oh, my thinking was that you sent that to me after the games on Saturday.
This was before, yeah. So now, if you go through the thing, right, we'll click on LSU. They win out. They win the conference title. It now, again, this is ESPN's little algorithm thing, but it now has their chances, if they win out, beat Georgia in the SEC championship, to make the playoff at 60%. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, but at the same time, their same algorithm has them only at a 37.5% chance to beat Alabama, and clearly you don't think that's correct.
I don't. Not one bit. It's frankly skewed. It's biased against Alabama. That team is not that good on offense. They're terrible.
Yeah, well, I don't think ESPN's algorithm for matchup predictors or predicting anything is good. But that's a whole nother point. We still need to get into college football playoff predictions before they happen tonight.
Last comment. I think it's more so this is not 60% chance. This would be, obviously, the odds are stacked against them for these things that happen. It would be a 60% chance of, if all of this happened, that would be probably a roughly good odd of the reality of them making it. I wouldn't say if they won out and beat Georgia that their odds would be 20% or 30%. I'd say their odds of getting to the 60% chance are probably the 7% that it's predicting. Like, it's very low. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No,
so that's why I don't.
I'm understanding. Yeah.
Okay. That's why I don't quite equate that to the same thing as the matchup predictor. If that makes sense.
I still maintain that most of their things are flawed. So
sure. But you got to throw in the narrative somewhere. Anyway, with that said, speaking of CFP craziness, tonight is the night that the first list comes out. All we really care about is the first 6. We've been talking about it for the last few weeks, kind of circled this day on the calendar. It's going to shake up. Again, obviously, win out, take care of your business. It's not really going to matter what you're ranked at right now, but we're going to get an idea of kind of what the committee thinks as far as strength of schedule, who's played who do they think is the better team. And so we're kind of going to give off our predictions for the top 6. I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah.
Why don't you start from 6 going towards 1?
Oh, okay. Cool. I mean, we can kind of just, this won't be too hard. We both have Oregon sitting at number 6, the second team to be just out. Love Oregon, like we talked about. Absolutely love Oregon right now. But just considering that they did lose to Washington is the only reason that I have them just below Washington, even though I think Washington has a lot of things to figure out. Like we talked about, there's no reason that they should be dropped or anything like that. I know that, something they look at when it kind of gets to the nitty-gritty is, well, how good was each win? Well, how good was your win against Arizona State? Common wins. How good were those? But that gets down to the really, close when we're evaluating. Basically, head to head, Washington still beat Oregon, so that's why they're a little bit ahead. Now, jumping into the actual playoff, we're looking at number 4. I have Florida State. I just, I at this point it doesn't matter. It's super hard. The only thing that I really have a point to make is when I get to who I have at 1 through 3, and I'll just kind of get into it. I have Michigan at 3, Georgia at 2, and Ohio State at 1. Now, there's a disclaimer. Yes, I am a Michigan fan, and yes, I did put Ohio State at number one. I think that the College Football Playoff Committee has a very interesting chance to show exactly what they value. They can show that they either they are gonna just follow, hey, we think the AP poll, we think they're right. We think that genuinely this is the top 1, 2, 3 with Georgia, Alabama, and Michigan. I think they also have a chance, and I think part of the reason that the college football playoff, rankings are cool is that they have nothing to do with preseason rankings, because even though the AP poll is 8 to 9 weeks in, it's still biased based off of slightly where they started out at the beginning of the season. If Ohio State was ranked ahead of Michigan at the beginning of the season, I think that Ohio State would be number 2 in the AP poll, even possibly, number 1.
Mm-hmm.
They continue to say that they care about strength of schedule and they care about quality wins. And I think if they really want to value that, I think that they should and have every reason at this point to put Ohio State at number 1, even above Georgia. And I think that's what they're going to do. I think that they're not impacted by preseason numbers at all whatsoever, which, like I said, I think the AP poll is slightly, even, weeks and weeks into the season. And they keep preaching that's what they value. And so if that's what you value and that's what we're going to base it off of, then Ohio State should be the number 1 team. That's just how I look at it. Do I think Ohio State's the number 1 team in the country? No. However, I think that's what it should be if that's the statement and that's what they're going to look at. And if that's what they say they're going to look at, then Ohio State should be 1. Georgia is fine at number 2, and Michigan will be at number 3.
Yeah, I pretty much had the exact same thing, except I had Georgia at 1 still, but I did have Ohio State at 2 and Michigan at 3.
That's just rude. Now you're just putting Ohio State above Michigan just to put them above Michigan.
No, and I do agree with everything you said, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's how it happened. Very rarely does the committee's picks end up, being kind of the end all be all. My only reason, I think, really, because Georgia right now, they don't have the pedigree of quality wins that Ohio State has. But I think for some reason, even though it shouldn't have as much of an impact, I think it does. I think there are certain biases. Georgia's won 25 games in a row. They're probably going to only have lost 1 game in the last 3 full regular seasons. That's impressive on its own. I don't really care who you play. So I think they're kind of going to be have the mindset of, hey, we're not going to knock Georgia down until Georgia knocks itself down, kind of thing. We're not going to put them any lower. So I'm going to stick with Georgia at 1 for now because I think the committee likes them. They're probably going to, they look so good even without Bowers against Florida, even though Florida's not a quality opponent like a Penn State or Notre Dame, or even you could argue against Wisconsin on the road, that Ohio State has. But you run into the same conversations like, okay, well, it's, they don't have the quality wins, but they're also not blowing out teams to the same pedigree that Michigan's been blowing out teams. And so it's just kind of a loop-de-loop circle of nonsense. I just think they do tend to favor the SEC, and it is what it is at this point. I think it's just going to be better once the 12-team format comes out, but I think Georgia squeaks by for some reason. But yeah, like we've continually said, it doesn't matter. You win your games, you'll get to the playoff. Don't worry about what a number in front of your team name is.
Yeah, Ohio State, Michigan, it literally does not matter if you're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whoever wins that game, and as long as Michigan beats Penn State, whoever wins the game is going to go on to the Big Ten championship, and it's going to kind of have the chokehold there. But yeah, it'll just the only thing that's interesting about the first rankings this year is tell us what you value.
Yeah.
And once they release them, we'll know exactly what they value and how they value it. So
the one thing I will say, we're not going to really, like we said, we're not going to go into the outside of the top 6 picks, but one thing that'll be interesting to see is, per the AP poll, now there are, I also think after this weekend, there are a handful of teams like LSU that are 2-loss teams that have had quality losses as well. And kind of where do they stack those against some of the 1-loss teams against bad programs, for instance? Like, where do you rank a Notre Dame and LSU versus a Oklahoma loss? Is an Oklahoma win against Texas, but a terrible loss against Kansas. But, Kansas is a little bit better. But you have a 2-loss Notre Dame team to Ohio State. Granted, they lost to Louisville.
yeah.
But right now you have, an LSU's lost to Florida State and Ole Miss, who are both ranked ahead of them. So it's going to be interesting to see where the rest of the 1-loss and 2-loss teams fall and kind of how they value those as well.
Yeah, for sure. We'll be able to see that and see what they come out with. But with that being said, I don't think we have anything more for this episode. It was definitely a pretty long episode. We covered quite a bit. I let Mason talk about LSU. We put it in the outline. It didn't even just come up. We put it in the outline. Mason's homer bias of LSU came out quite a bit in that episode. He's gonna squinch his face and maybe disagree, but
if they lose, I won't be here next week.
Yeah, you guys are just gonna have to sit with me for
Jacob by himself.
40 minutes. But anyways, we really appreciate y'all tuning in to another week. Quick shout out, there is an Instagram now. We got that up and going. So if you want to go hit the follow button on the Beers and Pigskins Instagram account, if you do choose to dabble in the world of Instagram, please do so. We really appreciate it. But with that being said, like we always say, hit all the buttons from wherever you're listening to us. Like, comment, subscribe. Please do check out the YouTube. That's kind of been a new addition. And we will see you guys later.
Uh-oh. Well, folks, I think we lost Jacob there. But as he was saying, we will see y'all next time. Go Tigers.